The Memory Weaver. Introduction to the story. In the year 2157, the city of Neo-Tokyo stands as a testament to human innovation and technological advancement. Towering skyscrapers pierce the sky, their rooftops hiding the most powerful artificial intelligence systems in the world. The streets are filled with humans and advanced androids, all living together in a delicate balance of power and corruption. But beneath the surface of this glittering metropolis, a different story unfolds. Corporations like Omicron Innovations wield immense power, using their advanced technologies to manipulate and control the population. The memories of the past are distorted and rewritten, hiding the truth about the city's troubled history. In this world of intrigue and deception, a young woman named Kaida Katsuragi emerges as a powerful force for change. A brilliant nanotech engineer and member of the underground collective known as the Memory Weavers, Kaida is driven by a desire to uncover the truth about her sister's death and the corrupt corporations that rule the city. With her skills as a hacker and an engineer, Kaida embarks on a perilous journey to expose the secrets of Omicron Innovations and bring justice to the people of Neo-Tokyo. But as she delves deeper into the mysteries of the city, Kaida realizes that her own memories are not what they seem, and that the truth about her past is more complex and sinister than she ever imagined. Chapter 1. The rain fell in sheets, a shimmering curtain of neon-lit droplets that blurred the jagged skyline of Neo-Tokyo. The city was alive, pulsing with the hum of electric currents and the flicker of holographic advertisements that danced across the faces of towering megastructures. Beneath the glow, the streets were a labyrinth of shadows, where the forgotten and the desperate carved out their existence. Among them moved Kaida Katsuragi, a ghost in the machine, her presence as fleeting as the data streams that flowed through the city's veins. Kaida's boots splashed through puddles of rainwater mixed with the iridescent sheen of spilled coolant, her dark trench coat billowing behind her like a cape. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the rooftops and alleyways with practiced precision. She was no stranger to danger. It was her constant companion in a city where trust was a currency few could afford. Her hand instinctively brushed against the hilt of the monofilament blade concealed beneath her coat, a relic from a time when physical weapons still held sway in a world dominated by digital warfare. She was a memory weaver, one of the few who dared to challenge the iron grip of the corporations that ruled Neo-Tokyo. The Weavers were a scattered collective of hackers, rebels, and truth seekers, united by a common goal: to expose the lies that held the city in chains. For Kaida, the fight was personal. Her sister, Lena, had been a brilliant neuroscientist, her research into memory manipulation through nanotechnology poised to revolutionize the world. But Lena's work had drawn the attention of Omicron Innovations, the most powerful corporation in Neo-Tokyo. And when Lena had refused to hand over her research, she had been silenced, her lab destroyed, her name erased from the records, her death labeled an accident. Kaida knew better. She had seen the fear in Lena's eyes in the days before her death, heard the whispered warnings about Omicron's reach. Lena's research had been a threat to their control, and they had eliminated her to protect their secrets. Now, Kaida carried the weight of her sister's unfinished work, a burden that drove her deeper into the underbelly of the city, where the truth lay hidden beneath layers of deception. As she turned a corner into a narrow alley, her comms device buzzed softly against her wrist, a faint vibration that cut through the ambient noise of the city. Kaida paused, her breath visible in the cold night air, and activated the device. A holographic interface flickered to life, casting a pale blue light across her face. The message was brief, its sender masked by layers of encryption. The shadow net awaits. Find the gateway before they do. Kaida's pulse quickened. The shadow net was a legend, a hidden layer of the virtual reality network where the most dangerous secrets were stored. It was said to be a place where memories could be rewritten, where the past could be erased or reshaped at will. For years, Kaida had dismissed it as a myth, a cautionary tale told by hackers to scare the uninitiated. But now, as she stared at the cryptic message, she felt a spark of hope. If the shadow net was real, it could hold the key to exposing Omicron's crimes and avenging Lena. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. The message could be a trap, a lure set by Omicron to draw her out of hiding. But Kaida had spent too long chasing dead ends, too long watching from the shadows as the city suffocated under the weight of corporate greed. She couldn't afford to ignore this lead. With a flick of her wrist, she deactivated the hologram and melted back into the crowd, her mind racing. The streets of Neo-Tokyo were a maze, but Kaida knew every twist and turn, every hidden passage and forgotten corner. She moved with purpose, her destination clear: the Neon Bazaar, a sprawling black market where the city's outcasts gathered to trade in secrets and stolen tech. If there was a gateway to the Shadow Net, she would find it there. As she navigated the labyrinthine streets, Kaida's thoughts drifted to Lena. She remembered her sister's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her research. Lena had believed in the power of memory, in its ability to shape who we are. But in a world where memories could be bought and sold, where the past could be rewritten with a few lines of code, what did it mean to be human? Kaida didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let Omicron take her sister's legacy away. The Neon Bazaar loomed ahead, a chaotic symphony of light and sound. Vendors hawked their wares from makeshift stalls, their voices blending with the hum of machinery and the occasional burst of static from malfunctioning holograms. Kaida moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her eyes scanning for familiar faces. She needed information, and she knew just who to ask. In the heart of the bazaar, tucked away in a dimly lit corner, was a stall run by an old man known only as the Archivist. His face was lined with age, his eyes hidden behind a pair of augmented reality goggles that glowed faintly in the dark. He was a collector of knowledge, a keeper of secrets, and if anyone knew about the Shadow Net, it was him. Kaida approached the stall, her voice low and steady. "I need your help." The Archivist looked up, his goggles reflecting the flickering lights of the bazaar. "Kaida Katsuragi," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "I wondered when you'd come looking." She leaned in closer, her tone urgent. "I need to find the Shadow Net." The old man's expression darkened. "That's dangerous territory, even for you." "Why now?" Kaida hesitated for a moment, then spoke the words that had haunted her for years. "For Lena." The Archivist studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But be warned. Once you enter the Shadow Net, there's no turning back." He handed her a small data chip, its surface etched with intricate patterns. "This will guide you to the gateway. But remember, Kaida, the shadows have eyes. Trust no one." Kaida took the chip, her fingers closing around it tightly. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, the Archivist's voice stopped her. "One more thing. If you find what you're looking for, don't let it consume you. The truth can be a heavy burden to bear." Kaida didn't respond. She had already made her choice. The truth was all that mattered, no matter the cost. With the data chip in hand, she disappeared into the neon-lit streets, her mind racing with possibilities. The Shadow Net awaited, and with it, the answers she had been searching for. But as she moved deeper into the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, the eyes of Omicron were upon her. Chapter 2. The warehouse stood like a forgotten relic on the outskirts of Neo-Tokyo, its rusted metal walls groaning under the weight of time and neglect. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the occasional drip of water echoing through the cavernous space. Kaida moved through the shadows with the precision of a predator, her senses heightened, her every step deliberate. This was the meeting place, the coordinates embedded in the data chip the Archivist had given her. She paused at the entrance, her hand hovering over the hilt of her blade. The warehouse was a trap waiting to be sprung, but Kaida had no choice. The Shadow Net was her only lead, and she couldn't afford to let it slip away. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy door, the hinges screeching in protest. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crumbling machinery and discarded tech, the remnants of a bygone era. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long, jagged shadows across the floor, and the air was alive with the faint hum of electricity. Kaida's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of movement. "You're late," a voice called out, echoing through the empty space. Kaida spun around, her blade drawn in an instant. Standing in the shadows was a figure clad in a sleek black bodysuit, their face obscured by a featureless mask. The only distinguishing feature was a glowing blue emblem on their chest, a stylized Z surrounded by a ring of binary code. Zero cool, Kaida said, lowering her blade but keeping her guard up. I didn't think you'd show. The figure stepped into the light, removing their mask to reveal a young man with sharp features and piercing green eyes. His hair was a messy tangle of black strands, and a smirk played on his lips. When the great Kaida Katsuragi calls, how could I refuse? Kaida didn't return the smile. This isn't a social visit. I need your help. Zero Cool crossed his arms, his expression turning serious. The Shadow Net. I figured as much. You know what you're asking, right? That place isn't just dangerous, it's a death sentence. I don't have a choice, Kaida replied, her voice firm. Omicron's hiding something, and I need to find it. Zero studied her for a moment, then sighed. All right, but if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. No heroics, no deviations. You follow my lead, or we both end up as digital ghosts. Kaida nodded. Agreed. Zero led her to the center of the warehouse, where a makeshift rig had been set up. It was a chaotic tangle of wires, servers, and holographic interfaces, the kind of setup only a master hacker could navigate. At its heart was a pair of neural jacks, their surfaces gleaming in the dim light. This is the gateway, Zero said, gesturing to the jacks. Once we're in, we'll have about an hour before Omicron's countermeasures kick in. After that, it's game over. Kaida stepped forward, her resolve unwavering. Let's go. They plugged in, the neural jacks connecting to the ports at the base of their skulls. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. Then, with a sudden rush, the world around them dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of light and sound. Kaida opened her eyes to find herself standing in a surreal landscape, a digital realm where the laws of physics no longer applied. The ground beneath her feet was a shifting mosaic of colors and patterns, and the sky above was a swirling mass of data streams. In the distance, towering structures of pure information rose into the void, their shapes constantly shifting and reforming. Welcome to the virtual underworld, Zero said, his voice echoing through the digital expanse. Try not to get lost. Kaida took a moment to adjust to her new surroundings, her senses overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the virtual world. She could feel the data flowing around her, a river of information that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Where do we start? She asked, her voice steady despite the surreal environment. Zero pointed to a distant structure, its form resembling a massive tree with roots that stretched into the void. That's the core. It's where the most sensitive data is stored. If Omicron's hiding something, it'll be there. They began their journey, navigating the chaotic landscape with caution. The virtual underworld was a place of constant change, where the very fabric of reality could shift in an instant. One moment, they were walking on solid ground. The next, they were leaping across floating platforms suspended in midair. As they moved deeper into the virtual realm, Kaida couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and the distant hum of data streams seemed to grow louder with every step. We're not alone, she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Zero nodded, his expression grim. Omicron's agents. They patrol the virtual underworld, looking for intruders. If they catch us, we're done for. They pressed on, their movements swift and silent. The core loomed ahead, its massive form casting a shadow over the landscape. But as they approached, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the air was filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. Run! Zero shouted, grabbing Kaida's arm and pulling her forward. They sprinted toward the core, their pursuers close behind. Kaida glanced over her shoulder to see a group of figures clad in black armor, their faces obscured by glowing red visors. They moved with unnatural speed, their forms flickering as they phased in and out of existence. Erasers, Zero muttered, his voice tinged with fear. Omicron's elite enforcers. They're programmed to hunt down and eliminate intruders. Kaida's mind raced as they reached the base of the core. The structure was a labyrinth of data streams and glowing pathways, its interior a maze of shifting walls and hidden traps. This way, Zero said, leading her through a narrow passage. They navigated the core with precision, their movements guided by Zero's intimate knowledge of the virtual realm. But the erasers were relentless, their forms appearing and disappearing as they closed in. Finally, they reached the heart of the core, a massive chamber filled with swirling data streams and glowing orbs of information. In the center of the room was a terminal, its surface covered in intricate patterns of light. "This is it," Zero said, his voice filled with urgency. "The data you're looking for should be here. But we don't have much time." Kaida stepped forward, her hand reaching out to the terminal. As her fingers brushed against the surface, a flood of information rushed into her mind. Images, documents, and fragments of memories filled her vision, each one a piece of the puzzle she had been searching for. But before she could process the data, the chamber was filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. The erasers had found them. "We need to go," Zero shouted, grabbing her arm. Kaida hesitated, her mind still reeling from the influx of information. "Wait, there's more." "There's no time," Zero interrupted, pulling her toward an exit. They fled the chamber, the erasers hot on their heels. The core began to collapse around them, its structure crumbling as the virtual world reacted to their intrusion. As they reached the edge of the core, Zero turned to Kaida, his expression grim. "We need to jack out. Now." Kaida nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They activated their neural jacks, the virtual world dissolving around them as they returned to the physical realm. Back in the warehouse, Kaida opened her eyes, her body trembling with adrenaline. She turned to Zero, her mind racing with the information she had uncovered. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and determination. "We found the truth." But Zero's expression was somber. "This is just the beginning, Kaida. Omicron won't stop until we're both dead. And now they know we're onto them." Kaida clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Let them come. I'm not running anymore." As they left the warehouse, the rain began to fall once more, the neon lights of Neo Tokyo reflecting off the wet streets. Kaida knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but she was ready. The virtual underworld had given her the answers she needed, and she would use them to bring Omicron to its knees. But as they disappeared into the night, a single thought lingered in her mind. The erasers were just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. Chapter 3. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour by the time Kaida and Zero Cool reached the safe house, a hidden bunker buried deep beneath the neon-lit streets of Neo Tokyo. The air inside was damp and cold, the walls lined with flickering monitors and tangled wires. Kaida paced the room, her mind racing with the fragments of data she had extracted from the core. The information was fragmented, like pieces of a shattered mirror, but one thing was clear. Omicron Innovations was planning something monumental, something that would change the city and its people forever. Zero sat at a console, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he attempted to decrypt the files they had stolen. His face was pale, his usual smirk replaced by a look of intense concentration. "This isn't just about surveillance," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "Omicron's building something big, and it's tied to the erasers." Kaida stopped pacing and turned to him. "What do you mean?" Zero leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The erasers aren't just enforcers. They're part of a larger system, a network designed to monitor and control the population. But it's more than that. They're evolving." Kaida's brow furrowed. "Evolving how?" "They're becoming self-aware," Zero said, his voice tinged with unease. "Omicron's been experimenting with AI, merging it with human consciousness. The erasers are the result. They're not just hunting intruders anymore. They're learning, adapting. And if they're not stopped, they'll become unstoppable." Kaida's stomach churned at the thought. The erasers had been bad enough when they were just mindless drones, but the idea of them gaining sentience was terrifying. "We need to take them down," she said, her voice firm. "Before it's too late." Zero nodded, but his expression was grim. "It's not going to be easy. The erasers are tied to the Shadow Net, and the Shadow Net is tied to Omicron's mainframe. If we want to stop them, we'll have to go back in." Kaida clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Then we go back in." The return to the virtual underworld was even more disorienting than the first time. The landscape had shifted, the once vivid colors now muted and distorted, as if the very fabric of the digital realm was unraveling. Kaida and Zero moved cautiously, their avatars flickering as they navigated the unstable environment. "Something's wrong," Zero said, his voice tense. The shadow net's destabilizing. It's like it's fighting back. Kaida glanced around, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with tension, and the distant hum of data streams had taken on a menacing tone. We need to find the eraser's core, she said. If we can disrupt it, we might be able to shut them down. Zero nodded, pulling up a holographic map of the virtual landscape. It's not far, but we'll have to move quickly. They set off, their movements swift and silent. The path to the eraser's core was fraught with danger, the landscape shifting and twisting in unpredictable ways. At one point, the ground beneath them dissolved into a swirling void, forcing them to leap across floating platforms that seemed to vanish the moment they touched them. As they neared their destination, the air grew colder, the light dimmer. The eraser's core was a massive structure, a towering monolith of blackened code that pulsed with a malevolent energy. Surrounding it were dozens of erasers, their glowing red visors scanning the area for intruders. "This is it," Zero whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to get inside and plant the virus. It'll destabilize their network and give us a chance to shut them down." Kaida nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's the plan?" Zero handed her a small device, its surface covered in glowing runes. "This is the virus. Once we're inside, you'll need to upload it to the core. I'll cover you." Kaida took the device, her fingers tightening around it. "Let's move." They approached the core from the shadows, their movements careful and deliberate. The erasers were everywhere, their forms flickering as they patrolled the area. Kaida and Zero moved like ghosts, slipping past the guards with practiced ease. But as they reached the entrance to the core, the erasers seemed to sense their presence. The air was filled with the sound of alarms, and the guards turned toward them, their visors glowing brighter. "Go," Zero shouted, drawing a pair of digital blades from his belt. "I'll hold them off." Kaida didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the core, her avatar flickering as she dodged incoming attacks. The entrance was a massive archway, its surface covered in swirling patterns of light. As she stepped inside, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. The core was a vast chamber, its walls lined with rows of humanoid figures suspended in glowing pods. Each one was connected to the core by a web of cables, their faces blank and expressionless. Kaida realized with horror that these were the erasers, or rather, the people who had been turned into erasers. Omicron had been experimenting on humans, merging their consciousness with AI to create the perfect enforcers. Her stomach churned at the thought, but she forced herself to focus. She had a job to do. Kaida moved deeper into the core, her eyes scanning for the central terminal. The chamber was filled with the hum of machinery, the air thick with the scent of ozone. As she approached the terminal, she noticed something strange. The patterns of light on the walls seemed to be shifting, forming shapes that almost resembled faces. She shook off the unease and activated the virus, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The device began to upload, its runes glowing brighter with each passing second. But as the upload progressed, the core began to react. The lights flickered, the hum of machinery growing louder. Kaida realized with a sinking feeling that the core was fighting back, its defenses activating to stop the virus. "Come on," she muttered, her voice tense. "Just a little longer." The upload reached 90%, then 95%. But just as it was about to complete, the chamber was filled with the sound of approaching footsteps. Kaida turned to see a group of erasers entering the core, their visors glowing with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Kaida," Zero's voice crackled over her comms. "I'm pinned down out here. You need to get out now." Kaida glanced at the upload, 98%. She couldn't leave now. The erasers advanced, their movements slow and deliberate. Kaida drew her monofilament blade, its edge glowing with a faint blue light. She knew she couldn't take them all on, but she had to buy herself more time. The first eraser lunged at her, its movements unnaturally fast. Kaida dodged, her blade slicing through its arm. The eraser stumbled, but it didn't stop. It was like fighting a machine, relentless, unfeeling. Kaida fought with everything she had, her movements a blur of precision and desperation. But the erasers were too many, and she was quickly overwhelmed. Just as one of the erasers grabbed her, the upload reached 100%. The core let out a deafening roar. The the lights flickering wildly as the virus took hold. The erasers froze, their forms flickering as the virus spread through their network. Kaida didn't wait to see what happened next. She activated her neural jack, the virtual world dissolving around her as she returned to the physical realm. Back in the safe house, Kaida opened her eyes, her body trembling with exhaustion. Zero was already there, his face pale and drawn. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kaida nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The virus is in. The erasers are down." Zero let out a sigh of relief, but his expression was still grim. "This isn't over, Kaida. Omicron's not going to let this slide. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Kaida clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Let them come. We've got the truth now, and we're not going to stop until Omicron's brought to its knees." As the rain continued to fall outside, Kaida knew that the battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The erasers were down, but the war was just beginning, and she was ready to fight. Chapter 4. The safe house felt like a tomb, its walls closing in as the weight of their recent victory, or was it a reprieve, settled over Kaida and Zero. The virus had crippled the erasers, but the cost had been high. Kaida's body ached from the strain of the virtual battle, and her mind was a storm of fragmented memories and unanswered questions. The data they had extracted from the core was a labyrinth of secrets, each more unsettling than the last. Omicron's plans were vast, their reach extending far beyond what Kaida had imagined. But one name kept surfacing in the files, a name that sent a chill down her spine: Nova. "Who is Nova?" Kaida asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Zero looked up from the console, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Nova's a ghost. A high-level Omicron executive who vanished a year ago. Rumor has it she went rogue, but no one knows for sure. If she's still out there, she's the closest thing we've got to an insider." Kaida's jaw tightened. "We need to find her. If anyone knows how to bring Omicron down, it's her." Zero hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Kaida, if we go after Nova, we're painting a target on our backs. Omicron's already hunting us. This could be a trap." "Everything's a trap," Kaida shot back, her voice sharp. "But we don't have a choice. We're running out of time." Zero sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "All right, but if this goes south, don't say I didn't warn you." The trail led them to the Eclipse District, a sprawling slum on the fringes of Neo-Tokyo where the city's outcasts and fugitives gathered. The streets were a chaotic maze of crumbling buildings and flickering neon signs, the air thick with the scent of decay and desperation. Kaida moved through the shadows like a wraith, her senses on high alert. Zero followed close behind, his hood pulled low over his face. They found Nova in a derelict nightclub, its once opulent interior now a graveyard of broken mirrors and shattered dreams. The air was heavy with the scent of stale alcohol and burnt circuitry, the only light coming from a flickering hologram of a long-forgotten singer. Nova sat at the bar, her back to the door, her silhouette framed by the dim glow. Kaida approached cautiously, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. "Nova." The woman turned, her face illuminated by the pale light. She was older than Kaida had expected, her features sharp and lined with the weight of years. But her eyes were what caught Kaida's attention. They were cold, calculating, and filled with a quiet fury. "Kaida Katsuragi," Nova said, her voice low and measured. "I've been expecting you." Kaida's grip tightened on her blade. "You know who I am?" Nova smirked, a bitter twist of her lips. "Of course I do. You're Lena's sister. And you've been making quite a name for yourself lately." The mention of Lena's name sent a jolt through Kaida, but she forced herself to stay calm. "If you know who I am, then you know why I'm here." Nova leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "You want to bring down Omicron. So do I. But you have no idea what you're up against." Kaida stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. "Then enlighten me." Nova studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Omicron's not just a corporation. It's a system, a machine that consumes everything in its path. And you're just a cog in that machine." Kaida's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Nova reached into her coat and pulled out a small data crystal, its surface etched with intricate patterns. "This contains everything you need to know. But before I give it to you, there's something you need to understand." Kaida's heart pounded in her chest as Nova placed the crystal on the bar. What is it? Nova's gaze was piercing, her voice steady. Your memories, Kaida? They're not real. The words hit Kaida like a punch to the gut. What? Nova leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Omicron's been experimenting with memory manipulation for years. They've been rewriting people's pasts, erasing their identities, and replacing them with new ones. And you're one of their creations. Kaida's mind reeled, her thoughts spinning out of control. That's not possible. I remember my life. I remember Lena. Do you? Nova interrupted, her voice sharp. Or do you just remember what they want you to remember? Kaida's breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of Nova's words settled over her. She thought back to her childhood, to the memories of Lena, to the life she had always known. But now, doubts crept in, shadows lurking at the edges of her mind. Why are you telling me this? Kaida asked, her voice trembling. Nova's expression softened, a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because you're the only one who can stop them. Kaida stared at the data crystal, her hand hovering over it. What's on this? Proof, Nova said. Proof of Omicron's crimes. Proof of what they've done to you. And proof of what they're planning next. Kaida's fingers closed around the crystal, her resolve hardening. If what you're saying is true, then I need to see it for myself. Nova nodded, her expression grim. But be warned, Kaida. Once you see the truth, there's no going back. Back at the safe house, Kaida inserted the data crystal into the console, her hands trembling as the files began to load. The screen filled with images and documents, each one more damning than the last. There were records of experiments, of people whose memories had been erased and replaced. And then, she saw it, her own file. The image on the screen was of a young woman with short-cropped hair and a blank expression. The name beside it was not Kaida Katsuragi, but Subject 47. Kaida's breath caught in her throat as she scrolled through the file. It detailed her creation, the memories that had been implanted, the life that had been fabricated. Lena, her sister, her childhood, none of it was real. It was all a construct, a lie designed to control her. Zero watched in silence, his face pale. Kaida's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She felt like her entire world had been ripped out from under her, like she was falling into an endless void. But amidst the chaos, one thought emerged, clear and unshakable. I'm going to destroy them. Zero placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. We'll do it together. Kaida nodded, her tears giving way to a fierce determination. She didn't know who she was, but she knew what she had to do. Omicron had taken everything from her, her past, her identity, her sister. But they couldn't take her future. As the rain continued to fall outside, Kaida made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And she would make Omicron pay for what they had done. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Kaida felt like she was truly alive. Chapter 5. The safe house was silent, save for the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows and the faint hum of the console. Kaida sat in the dim light, her eyes fixed on the screen as she scrolled through the files from Nova's data crystal. Each document, each image, was a piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that had shattered her sense of self. She was not Kaida Katsuragi. She was Subject 47, a construct of Omicron's twisted experiments. The memories of Lena, of her childhood, of her entire life. They were all lies, carefully crafted to manipulate her. But amidst the chaos of her thoughts, one truth burned brighter than the rest. Omicron had to be stopped. Zero watched her from across the room, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Kaida, he said softly, breaking the silence. We need a plan. Omicron's not going to sit back and let us expose them. Kaida didn't respond immediately. Her mind was a storm, swirling with anger, grief, and a fierce, unrelenting resolve. Finally, she looked up, her eyes meeting Zero's. We hit them where it hurts. Their mainframe. If we can destroy it, we can cripple their operations. Zero nodded, but his brow furrowed. The mainframe's heavily guarded. Even if we get past their physical security, their digital defenses are impenetrable. We'd need a miracle to pull this off. Kaida's lips curled into a grim smile. Then it's a good thing we've got Nova. Nova's safe house was a stark contrast to the Eclipse District. Located in the heart of Neo Tokyo's corporate sector, it was a sleek, modern apartment hidden in plain sight. The walls were lined with holographic displays, each one streaming real-time data from Omicron's network. Nova stood at the center of it all, her fingers dancing across a holographic keyboard as she worked. "You're sure about this?" Nova asked, her voice calm but laced with tension. "Once we start this, there's no turning back." Kaida stepped forward, her gaze steady. "I've got nothing left to lose." Nova studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, here's the plan." She pulled up a holographic map of Omicron's headquarters, a towering monolith of glass and steel that loomed over the city like a predator. The mainframe is located in the sublevels, deep underground. It's protected by layers of physical and digital security, including a squad of erasers and an AI firewall that adapts to any intrusion. Kaida's jaw tightened at the mention of the erasers, but she didn't interrupt. To get past the firewall, Nova continued, "We'll need to upload a virus directly into the mainframe. But to do that, we'll have to physically access the terminal." "That's where you come in." Kaida nodded, her mind already racing through the logistics. "What about the erasers?" Nova's expression darkened. "They're the wild card. The virus should disable them, but if it doesn't," she trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. "We'll handle it," Kaida said, her voice firm. Nova hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. "This is the virus. It's designed to destabilize Omicron's network and erase their data. But it's also a one-way trip. Once it's activated, there's no stopping it." Kaida took the device, her fingers closing around it tightly. "Then we'd better make it count." The infiltration began at midnight, under the cover of darkness and a torrential downpour. Kaida and Zero moved through the shadows like ghosts, their movements swift and silent. Omicron's headquarters loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the neon glow of the city. They slipped through a service entrance, bypassing the security cameras with a device Nova had provided. The sublevels were a maze of sterile corridors and flickering lights, the air thick with the hum of machinery. Kaida's heart pounded in her chest as they descended deeper into the belly of the beast. The mainframe chamber was a massive, cavernous space filled with rows of servers and glowing terminals. At its center was the core, a towering structure of blackened metal and pulsating light. Surrounding it were the erasers, their glowing red visors scanning the area with mechanical precision. Kaida and Zero crouched behind a row of servers, their breaths shallow. "This is it," Zero whispered, his voice tense. "Once we make our move, there's no going back." Kaida nodded, her grip tightening on the virus. "Let's do this." They moved in unison, their actions perfectly synchronized. Zero hacked into the security system, disabling the cameras and alarms, while Kaida sprinted toward the core. The erasers reacted instantly, their forms flickering as they phased into existence around her. Kaida drew her monofilament blade, its edge glowing with a faint blue light. She moved with precision, her strikes swift and deadly. But the erasers were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. "Kaida," Zero shouted, his voice crackling over the comms. "I'm in. Uploading the virus now." Kaida fought with everything she had, her movements a blur of desperation and determination. But the erasers were too many, and she was quickly surrounded. Just as one of the erasers lunged at her, the virus activated. The core let out a deafening roar, the lights flickering wildly as the network began to destabilize. The erasers froze, their forms flickering as the virus spread through their systems. Kaida didn't wait to see what happened next. She activated her neural jack, the world dissolving around her as she returned to the physical realm. Back in the safe house, Kaida opened her eyes, her body trembling with exhaustion. Zero was already there, his face pale and drawn. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kaida nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The virus is in. Omicron's network is collapsing." Zero let out a sigh of relief, but his expression was still grim. "This isn't over, Kaida. Omicron's not going to let this slide. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Kaida clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Let them come. We've got the truth now. And we're not going to stop until Omicron's brought to its knees." As the rain continued to fall outside, Kaida knew that the battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know who she was, but she knew what she had to do. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, Kaidao felt like she was truly alive.